Today is Good Friday, and Good Friday is the day that we remember the crucifixion of Christ. And a lot of people make the comment, well, why is it called Good Friday? I mean, is there really anything that good about it? I mean, Christ is dying, Christ is suffering. What is so good about Christ being whipped on the back, having nails driven through his hands and feet, a crown of thorns pressed down on his head? Like, what is good about that? Well, here's the answer. It's found in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18. It says, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous." Why? To bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. So we see a few reasons here why Christ suffered. Number one, and why Good Friday is so good. Number one, we see Christ suffered once for sins. Now notice Christ only had to suffer once for sins. You see, Jesus lived the perfect life that none of us had ever lived, and he only had to suffer once. Why? Because when he was on that cross, all of our sins were on his shoulders, and when he died suffering the consequences that we deserved for our sins. And when he died, all the consequences for our sins died with him for those of us that place our faith in him. This is what the Bible calls the great exchange. He suffered once for our sins. What? The righteous for the unrighteous. He is righteous. He is perfect. We are unrighteous. We are imperfect. We are sinful people. But here's the good news, is he does this great exchange where he says, I'll die for your unrighteousness, and then you could have all the benefits that I deserve for my perfect righteousness. You could have a new identity where God looks at you and he sees you as a completely righteous person. You're a child of God. You're a friend of God. You've been forgiven by God. You have a home in heaven. Why? Because there's been this great exchange that occurred on the cross, the righteous for the unrighteous, so that you could be brought to God. Why did Christ suffer once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous? It says it right there. To bring you to God. And this really is the bottom line of why Good Friday is so good. Why Christ being crucified is good news. Is because ultimately that is the means by which God brings us to him. It is the way that we have a relationship with God. It is the road that leads us to heaven. It is the road that leads us to relationship with God. There is no other way that we can be saved, no other way we could be made children of God outside of Christ suffering once for our sins, the righteous for the unrighteous. And here's the good news of Good Friday. Because ultimately, Good Friday wouldn't be good if there wasn't such a thing as Easter. And that's what the last part of verse 18 points to. It says that he was put to death in the body, but made alive, there's the resurrection, in the spirit. And so Good Friday, not only is it good because Christ is dying for our sins, not only is it good because there's this great exchange, the righteous for the unrighteous, not only is it good because ultimately it's what brings us to God, but it's good because Jesus didn't stay dead. If Christ suffered and stayed in the tomb, we would have no reason for hope. But the good news is Christ was crucified, Christ was buried, but even more than those things, Christ was resurrected. And because he lives, we also can live. And that is the good news that we're going to be celebrating at church this Sunday at 11 a.m. And I want to encourage you to not just come yourself, but invite a friend, invite a family member, so that we can celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ that offers the greatest hope and the best news this world has ever seen. I'll see you this Sunday. I love you. God bless you.